By noon, the heat had turned merciless. Stone walls breathed fire back into the streets. The roads shimmered, as if the ground itself were melting. The air felt strangled, tight, exhausted, as though the sky had forgotten how to breathe. Then, beyond the town, something appeared on the horizon. A cloud, dark and wide, suspended in the distance like a promise. And suddenly the same people who had laughed at their prophet began running toward it. Traders, chiefs, fathers, mothers, men whose hands had learned to steal while smiling. People who had heard warning after warning and answered with mockery, arrogance, and dares for punishment to come. They thought the shadow had arrived to save them. They did not know it had arrived to end them. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and send peace and blessings upon Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Because this is not only the story of an ancient people destroyed long ago. This is the story of what happens when faith is pushed out of public life, when greed begins to speak in the language of intelligence, and when a society grows so comfortable with dishonesty that it can stand in prosperity while already standing at the edge of ruin. Allah introduces this people in a way that already tells you something important. And to Midian, we sent their brother Shuayb. He was not a stranger passing through. He was not an outsider speaking a language they could dismiss. He was one of them. He knew their roads, their markets, their habits, their excuses, their family lines, the tone of their speech, the pride behind their laughter. He stood among his own people and called them back to Allah before the punishment fell. There is pain in that. A prophet sent to his own people carries not only the duty of warning, but the ache of watching familiar faces harden themselves against the truth. The people of Midian were a people of trade. Their life moved through roads, caravans, scales, storage, markets, negotiations, and exchange. This is why the Quran does not describe their corruption in abstract language. Their sins lived in the exact places where life happened every day. In the measure, in the weight, in the pricing, in the goods of other people, in the roads where travelers passed, in the order of the land after Allah had set it right. Their evil was woven into ordinary life so tightly that many of them probably no longer saw it as evil at all. That is one of the most frightening parts of this story. Corruption does not always arrive with drums. Sometimes it enters quietly. Through habits people begin calling normal. A man would sell grain and shave a little from the measure. Another would weigh cloth, then press the scale just enough to turn fairness into theft. A merchant would praise what he was selling beyond its worth and bury the defect under polished words. Somebody would buy from a poor traveler for one price and sell the same goods with deception layered into the transaction. People smiled. Wealth circulated. Business looked alive. But trust was dying in every exchange. Every dishonest weight, every short measure, every hidden defect, every lie wrapped in commerce was not only a social crime, it was rebellion against Allah. Shuayb alayhi salam did not come merely to fix a market. He came to repair a people whose spiritual disease had poisoned every part of their public life. That is why his call began where every prophetic call begins. O my people, worship Allah. You have no God but Him. Then came the command that struck directly at the places where their corruption lived. Give full measure and full weight. Do not diminish the goods of people. Do not spread facade in the land after it has been set right. And do not sit on every path, threatening and turning people away from the way of Allah. In the story of Shuayb alayhi salam, Tawhid and justice are not separated. Faith in Allah and honesty with people stand together. The heart that forgets Allah eventually learns to cheat His servants. The tongue that no longer trembles before the hereafter soon finds it easy to justify exploitation. Shuayb alayhi salam warned them with clarity and tenderness. He did not speak to them as though they were beneath saving. He called them my people. He reminded them that Allah had given them prosperity. He said, in meaning, that He saw them in comfort and abundance, but He feared for them the punishment of an overwhelming day. That warning is astonishing. They were not starving. They were not visibly collapsing. Their town was functioning. Their business moved. Their roads were used. Their tables were filled. From the outside, things looked stable. This is exactly why they found the warning absurd. What danger could be near? They must have thought. While profits still flowed and the market still breathed each morning. But prophets do not read societies by appearances. They read them by truth. Shuayb alayhi salam could see the fracture under the surface. A city can be rich while its soul is bankrupt. A people can count wealth while they are already spending away their final moral reserves. Prosperity is not proof of safety. Motion is not proof of health. Noise is not proof of life. Sometimes abundance itself becomes a veil, a test, a final extension before judgment. This is captured in one of the most revealing things they said to Shuayb alayhi salam. Does your prayer command you that we should leave what our fathers worshipped and stop doing whatever we want with our wealth? Listen to the attitude inside that question. They were not asking out of sincere confusion. They were mocking the idea that prayer could shape economics, that worship could regulate desire, that revelation could place limits on ownership. To them, wealth meant freedom from moral restraint. Religion was acceptable only if it stayed silent while greed governed public life. That is a disease that never really dies. It only changes clothes from century to century. Then they added another layer of mockery. They said to him, "You are surely the forbearing, the rightly guided one." On the surface, the words could sound respectful, but the context exposes the poison inside them. This was sarcasm, a sneer, the kind of praise meant to humiliate, as if they were saying, "Look at this wise man, this saintly man, this gentle man who thinks he can lecture a whole society on what it may buy, sell, worship, and become." Corrupt societies are rarely content just to reject truth. They like to make it look ridiculous first. When mockery did not silence him, they turned to pressure. The elites told the people plainly that if they followed Shuayb, they would be losers. That line reveals something timeless. Whenever falsehood feels threatened, it reframes obedience as loss. It tells people that honesty is impractical, that obedience is bad economics, that principles are for the naive, that compromise is maturity, that corruption is realism. The old lie survives because every generation finds new phrases to dress it in. And when persuasion failed, they moved to threats. They told Shuayb alayhi salam and the believers with him that they would be expelled from the town unless they returned to the religion of their people. Imagine the ugliness of that response. A prophet calls them back to Allah, asks them to stop cheating, stop intimidating people, stop spreading corruption, and their answer is exile. That is what power does when it has become addicted to wrongdoing. It no longer argues with truth. It seeks to remove it from public sight. Another verse gives us a sharper glimpse of their contempt. They told him that were it not for his family, they would have stoned him. In other words, your truth does not protect you with us. Your message means nothing to us. Only your tribal connections keep you alive. This is social decay in one sentence. A people no longer restrained by reverence for Allah or by respect for truth are restrained only by temporary calculations. The absence of murder is not righteousness when the only thing preventing it is politics. Still, Shuayb alayhi salam did not dilute the message. He did not tell them to keep their idols for now and at least improve their business ethics a little. He did not tell them to retain the fraud but reduce the percentage. He did not negotiate revelation into something socially acceptable. Prophetic mercy is not cowardice. Real mercy tells people the truth before the final door closes. So he continued to call them fully to Allah and fully to justice, because both belong to the same Lord. He reminded them that Allah had increased them after they had once been fewer. He warned them not to let hostility toward him drag them toward the fate of earlier nations. The people of Nuh, Hud, Salih, and Lut. In meaning, he told them that those destroyed nations were not so distant from them in history or in consequence. The pattern of destruction was not a myth. It was a moral law playing itself out across human history. When truth is delivered, mocked, resisted, and finally dared, judgment is no longer far. Yet pride had settled deeply into them. This too matters. A people are rarely destroyed because they sinned once. They are destroyed after warning, after proof, after chances to return, after arrogance matures into defiance. First they defend themselves, then they normalize the wrongdoing. Then they call the reformer extreme, unrealistic, or dangerous. Then they portray the prophet as the real problem. Then they dare punishment. By that stage, they no longer see themselves as rebels. They see themselves as protectors of their way of life. The Quran preserves this terrifying moment of defiance. The people associated with Aykah said, in meaning, if you are truthful, then let pieces of the sky fall upon us. They were no longer merely disbelieving. They were taunting divine judgment itself. They wanted proof, but not the kind that leads to repentance. They wanted the kind spoken with arrogance, a sign presented not to soften the heart, but to satisfy a challenge. That is one of the darkest states a human being can reach. To hear warnings so often that one begins to mock the punishment of Allah as if it were impossible. At this point, a careful reader notices that the Quran uses several related descriptions. Midian in one place, Ashab al-Aykah in another, and then the punishment known as the Day of Shadow. Scholars discuss the relationship between these names. Many classical mufassirun held that the people of Midian and the people of al-Aykah referred to the same broad community or overlapping people, described from different angles in different passages. Others explored whether there may have been some distinction between the designations. What matters for the listener is to keep the telling careful. The Quranic moral picture remains the same. Idolatry, fraud, social corruption, intimidation, rejection of revelation, and finally destruction after repeated warning. The names deepen the picture. They do not change the warning. Shuayb alayhi salam remained steady. He did not chase victory for himself. He returned the matter to Allah. In meaning, he told them to work according to their position, and he would work according to his, and soon they would know upon whom the punishment of disgrace would descend, and who was lying. This is the calm of a prophet who knows that truth does not become false because a crowd mocks it, and falsehood does not become safe because a market profits from it. Then the end approached. The Quran describes the punishment using several expressions. In Surah Al-Araf, the earthquake seized them. In Surah Hud, the blast overtook them. In Surah Ash-Shu'ara, they were seized by the punishment of the Day of Shadow. The classical scholars often reconciled these descriptions as aspects of one overwhelming destruction, not contradictions. A devastating event can include terror, sound, trembling, collapse, and a final form by which the day becomes known. The Day of Shadow is the title that lodges in the heart because of how haunting it is. Reports from the scholars of Tafsir describe an intense heat sent upon them before the final punishment descended. Not ordinary heat. Not the familiar summer a people know how to survive. This was crushing, suffocating heat. The air itself became hostile. Shelter no longer cooled. Walls no longer helped. Shade no longer worked. The town must have felt trapped inside a furnace. Breathing grew difficult. Endurance thinned. Their bodies weakened under a pressure that felt unnatural. Then, when exhaustion had reached its peak, a cloud appeared. Dark, wide, still. Imagine the deception of that moment. The same people who had lied in trade, threatened on the roads, mocked their prophet, and dared punishment to come now saw above them what looked like relief. What do desperate people do when shade appears after unbearable heat? They gather beneath it. They hurry toward it. They call others to join them. They interpret it as mercy because they want mercy without repentance, relief without return, safety without surrender. Imagine the scene. The streets are burning. The air is still. Children cry. Men whose pride once filled the market now search the horizon like frightened animals. Women try to shield their families from a heat that seems to descend from every direction. Then someone sees it first. A cloud, dark and wide enough to gather under. A murmur spreads. Then relief. Then movement. Then a crowd begins to run. The Quran calls it the punishment of the Day of Shadow. The shadow did not come to cool them. It came to assemble them. It came to gather the arrogant into the place where judgment would descend. Beneath what looked like rescue, the decree was waiting. Then came the blast, the terror, the overwhelming destruction. Some accounts mention fire. Some mention a cry. Some mention the violent seizure that overtook them completely. However, the details are imagined. The result is certain. Their strength did not protect them. Their commerce did not protect them. Their clan ties did not protect them. Their market did not protect them. Their roads did not protect them. And their confidence certainly did not protect them. By morning they lay fallen in their dwellings as though they had never prospered there at all. Read that slowly. As though they had never prospered there at all. This is one of the most devastating images in the Quran. The people who had once filled those streets with movement, bargaining, boasting, laughter, intimidation, deals, threats, and noise were suddenly reduced to a silence so complete that the land itself looked as if it denied they had ever flourished. Yesterday they were influential. Today they were a warning. Yesterday they thought their systems were too established to fail. Today it was as if their permanence had been an illusion all along. That is one of the hardest lessons in the story. Wealth creates the illusion of permanence. Social momentum creates the illusion of legitimacy. Public confidence creates the illusion of immunity. But when Allah removes barakah and exposes a people to the truth of what they are, everything can vanish so completely that even their recent power begins to feel unreal. And what of Shu'ayb alayhi salam? The Quran gives us one of the saddest prophetic moments after the destruction. He turned away from them and said, in meaning, that he had delivered the messages of his Lord to them and given sincere advice. So how could he then grieve for a disbelieving people? Those words carry grief and finality together. He had warned them honestly. He had not hidden anything. He had not deceived them. He had not wanted their destruction. He wanted their salvation before he witnessed their end. That is the mercy of prophets. They stand in the line of danger for a people before punishment stands over them. This is why the story of Shu'ayb alayhi salam should never be reduced to a dramatic ancient punishment and nothing more. It is preserved because the pattern returns. When worship is corrupted, dealings are corrupted. When dealings are corrupted, trust is corrupted. When trust is corrupted, society can continue moving while quietly decaying from within. A people may keep counting money long after they have stopped counting right and wrong. They may keep building, trading, and expanding while the soul of the civilization is already thinning. The people of Midian are remembered not because they were poor and desperate, but because they were prosperous and corrupt. They are remembered because they used intelligence to justify dishonesty. They are remembered because fraud became ordinary. They are remembered because public space became a tool of intimidation. They are remembered because the message of Tawhid challenged their market, and they hated it for that. They are remembered because a prophet stood among them, and they chose mockery over repentance, pressure over humility, and arrogance over return. And the shadow remains one of the most terrifying images in Quranic storytelling precisely because it reverses what human beings expect. Judgment did not arrive looking like the thing they feared most. It arrived looking like the thing they desired most. Shade, relief, cooling, safety, a place to gather, a solution to the pain already pressing down on them. That reversal carries a warning for every age. Sometimes what people run toward with total confidence is already carrying their ruin. Not every relief is mercy. Not every opening is safety. Not every expansion is favor. A door can swing open and still lead downward. This is why the story asks us not only to tremble at the ending, but to inspect the beginning. Where does collapse actually start? Does it start when the punishment appears? No. It starts when truth becomes inconvenient. It starts when cheating becomes clever. It starts when dishonesty becomes profitable. It starts when people learn to smile while taking what is not theirs. It starts when a community praises faith as long as faith remains decorative and private, then mocks it the moment it speaks about wealth, contracts, labor, public ethics, and power. It starts when the rights of others become negotiable and the rights of Allah become distant. This story is so powerful because it does not revolve around armies and kings. It revolves around scales, roads, contracts, money, intimidation, and ordinary life. It reminds us that Allah sees the grain shaved from the measure. He sees the weight manipulated in secret. He sees the defect hidden beneath the sales pitch. He sees the public system designed to burden the weak and protect the strong. He sees the tax, the bribe, the distortion, the exploitation. The lie repeated so often it begins to sound normal. He sees the heart that resents revelation because revelation threatens advantage. And this is why Shu'ayb alayhi salam was sent to confront exactly those things. Not in abstraction, in the middle of lived reality, in the market, on the roads, in the ethics of exchange, in the habits of power. His story teaches that Islam is not a ritual shell placed beside life. It enters life. It judges life. It purifies life. It asks how wealth is earned, how rights are preserved, how the weak are treated, how speech is used, how public space is governed. how power behaves when no one appears strong enough to challenge it. The people of Midian did not hate his message because they failed to understand it. They hated it because they understood it too well. They understood that if Shuayb alayhis salam were obeyed, their idols would fall, their fraud would be exposed, their roads would change, their manipulations would end, and the sacred freedom they imagined they had over wealth would be broken by accountability before Allah. That is why they responded not with curiosity, but with sarcasm, threat, tribal calculation, and dares for punishment. They were not merely mistaken. They were invested. That should make every believer pause. We often imagine disbelief as something simple and intellectual, as though people only reject truth because they have not seen enough evidence. But sometimes the evidence is clear. The real barrier is that truth makes demands. It closes off profitable forms of corruption. It limits desire. It interrupts power. It refuses to let a person be God over his own appetite. When that happens, the issue is no longer evidence. It is surrender. How many transactions today are built on concealment? How many livelihoods are inflated by deception? How many systems profit by reducing what belongs to others? How often is religion welcomed as long as it does not question consumption, status, or money? How often are voices of moral correction described as unrealistic, severe, divisive, or bad for business? How often is public corruption defended with polished language until injustice itself sounds sophisticated? The names and tools may change. The spiritual pattern does not. That is why the people of Midian, the people of Aykah, and the people seized by the day of shadow remain a warning written in heat across the Quran. A people can stand in prosperity and still stand close to judgment. A market can be full while a nation empties itself of truth. A society can look successful while trust is dying in every transaction. A cloud can appear like mercy while carrying decree. And a prophet can be rejected not because his call is unclear, but because it is clear enough to threaten the idols hidden inside public life. So when we hear this story, we should not only ask how they died, we should ask how they lived. What did they normalize? What did they laugh at? What truths did they push to the margins? What rights did they shave away one fraction at a time? What kind of hearts hear prophetic warning and answer with jokes, threats, and bargaining? The shadow at the end is terrifying, yes. But the road to that shadow is made of smaller sins people learn to call reasonable. May Allah protect us from hearts that grow comfortable with wrongdoing. May He protect us from wealth that blinds, from speech that beautifies falsehood, from systems that feed on the rights of others, and from religiosity that leaves the market, the street, and public life untouched. May He make us people who fear Him in private and public, who give full measure and full weight, who refuse to build comfort on deception, and who recognize that real safety is not found in abundance, status, or applause, but in obedience to the one who sent the warning before the punishment. Because the most frightening possibility is not only that punishment comes, it is that it may come wearing the form we wanted most. And that is why this story should make us nervous in the most personal way. It is easy to hear about Midian and imagine a distant people with ancient markets, old roads, and vanished dwellings. It is harder to look at our own lives and ask where the same disease hides now. Not in the same clothes, perhaps, but in the same soul. The dishonest invoice, the manipulated number, the hidden flaw in a product, the contract written to trap the weak, the employee underpaid because he has no leverage, the customer misled because he can be replaced, the debt designed to multiply suffering, the public voice that defends exploitation as efficiency, the polished speaker who can make greed sound modern and moral at the same time. These are not small things when they become normal. These are the seeds from which whole climates of corruption grow. One of the subtle lessons in the story of Shuayb alayhis salam is that people do not need to stop speaking about religion in order to become corrupt. They only need to domesticate it. They only need to reduce it to a corner of life where it no longer threatens their appetites. Let prayer remain, but let it not speak about money. Let worship remain, but let it not interfere with status. Let belief remain, but let it not challenge the systems from which we benefit. That is why their words were so revealing. Does your prayer command you? They could not understand a religion that entered the marketplace because they wanted a religion that never moved beyond ceremony. And that temptation is alive in every age. A believer hears this story and should feel two fears at once. The first is fear of obvious wrongdoing. cheating, fraud, intimidation, mockery of revelation. The second is more subtle and perhaps more dangerous. The fear of becoming so accustomed to sin that one begins to interpret every warning as exaggeration. Midian did not wake up one morning and decide to race toward destruction. They arrived there through repetition, a dishonest habit repeated until it felt intelligent, a compromised transaction repeated until it felt necessary, a mocking phrase repeated until it felt witty, a resistance to truth repeated until it felt principled. Then one day, punishment stood over a people who could no longer tell the difference between prosperity and delay. This is why delay should never be confused with approval. A person may continue to earn. A company may continue to expand. A society may continue to build. A corrupt order may continue to function. None of that proves safety. Allah gives rope. He gives chances. He sends reminders. He opens doors of return. He allows time for repentance. But time itself is not innocence. Continuation is not endorsement. Sometimes a thing continues only so that proof may be completed against those who refuse to return. And there is another reason the image of the cloud is unforgettable. It exposes how human beings often judge by sensation rather than truth. Heat had become their problem, so shade looked like salvation. But their deepest problem was not heat. It was rebellion. Their crisis was not meteorological before it was moral. The cloud seemed to answer the surface pain while actually carrying the final answer to the deeper disease. How often does that happen in life? A person asks only for relief from discomfort, while ignoring the sin that made the discomfort meaningful. A society asks only for recovery, expansion, and ease, while refusing to ask what in its own conduct has poisoned its condition. Then when relief appears, it may not be mercy at all. It may be the last gathering before collapse. So the story of Shuayb alayhi salam is not only a warning to merchants, though merchants should tremble at it. It is a warning to anyone who handles trust, to leaders, to employers, to influencers, to teachers, to officials, to buyers and sellers, to anyone whose words can shape perception, whose numbers can distort reality, whose position can pressure the vulnerable, whose confidence can normalize what Allah hates. The scale is not only made of metal. There are scales in speech, scales in media, scales in policy, scales in wages, scales in testimony, scales in judgment, scales in every place where one party holds power over another. To give full measure is not only to weigh grain honestly, it is to refuse to reduce what belongs to people in any form Allah has made sacred. That is why this Quranic story remains so alive. It reaches into every era and asks, what are your scales now? Where do you diminish people now? Which frauds have become respectable? Which corruptions have become ordinary? Which truths are welcomed only until they become expensive? Which prophetic teachings are celebrated in speech but quietly resisted in practice because they threaten comfort, image, or gain? When those questions are no longer asked, a people may still look successful, but they have already begun to resemble Midian. May Allah not make us of those who hear warning only as literature, admire it only as rhetoric, and then return unchanged to the same dishonest habits. May He make the stories of the Quran mirrors before they become evidence against us. May He purify our earnings, our contracts, our speech, our dealings, and our ambitions. And may He save us from the most dangerous kind of deception, the kind that lets a person feel shaded while already standing beneath the cloud of judgment.